More details of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's capture have emerged now. Reports say that US forces dragged the president out of his bedroom. He and his wife have been dragged out of their bedroom. Remember that US President Donald Trump has confirmed that Nicolas Maduro and his wife both have been flown out of Venezuela. In fact, they are in the custody of US forces, is what we understand. They have also been indicted by a district court in America, and they could be facing criminal charges. Both of them are already facing charges of narco-terrorism, is what we understand. There's a long spate of charges that have been filed against them, but both of them have been dragged out of bedroom. Reports suggest that that's the way US forces managed to capture them, and they are now on US soil. Moving on to more breaking news now. United States of America's Vice President J.D. Vance has reacted to US strikes on Venezuela. J.D. Vance has said that Trump means what he says. He has endorsed the action, and he has said that President Trump means what he says, and that one does not get to avoid US justice. He's referring to Nicolas Maduro's custody now, and Nicolas Maduro being flown out of Venezuela and by the US forces. This is the Vice President of America reacting to what happened, to the strikes that US initiated on Venezuela after months of military buildup. And Vance has said that one does not get to avoid US justice. Let's also tell you what really happened today. US launched an attack on Venezuela after months of military buildup. At least 7 explosions have been reported in several areas of Venezuela, and this includes not just the capital of Caracas, but also several other states of the country. Residents that we spoke to said loud blasts, explosions were heard just minutes apart from each other. Those visuals there of US Air Force carrying out strikes on army bases in Venezuela. These visuals, you can also see missile attacks that have been launched by US Air Force. This happened today morning. Colombian President Gustavo Petro, meanwhile, has shared a video of US attack on Venezuela. In some ways, this also confirms the fallout, the extent of damage that these strikes caused on Venezuelan soil. The video that you see on your screens now, the visuals also show the extent of US attack and the aftermath of the attacks. Thick smoke was also seen rising over parts of Caracas, which is the capital of Venezuela. And this followed multiple explosions due to US strikes, which have been confirmed by the United States of America. There are visuals that show smoke rising across the country from several parts. There's a state of emergency that has been imposed. Forces have been deployed in various parts of the country, even as protesters have also assembled, seeking the release of the head of the state. Well, the United States of America carried out large-scale strikes on Venezuela, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and flying them out of the country. They've also been indicted by a district court in America on charges of narco-terrorism. Venezuela has accused the United States of hitting residential areas in a wave of strikes early Saturday and announced a major deployment of military resources across the country. It has called this an act of aggression, military aggression, driven by America's greed for natural resources. There's been a military buildup in Venezuela by the United States for some time now. President Donald Trump has been clear that he wants Nicolas out. This is a development that's likely to have consequences for the world. Geopolitics could change. Remember, Russia, Iran have already condemned these attacks by the US, while Spain has offered to mediate. Now, is this an act of overreach or simply another chapter in geopolitics where a superpower picks up a battle to send out a larger message of dominance to the world? That's what we discuss in the course of the next few minutes. Let's take a look at some reactions.
La Fuerza Armada Nacional Bolivariana informa al mundo entero que en la madrugada de hoy, 3 de enero, el pueblo venezolano ha sido objeto de la más criminal agresión militar por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica. Hasta el momento, la barbarie de las fuerzas invasoras que han profanado nuestro suelo sagrado en las localidades de Fuerte Tiuna, Caracas, los estados Miranda, Aragua y La Guaira, llegando a impactar con sus misiles y cohetes disparados desde sus helicópteros de combate en urbanismos de población civil, para lo cual estamos ya levantando la información referente a heridos y muertos.
Nosotros desconocemos el paradero del presidente Nicolás Maduro y de la primera dama Cilia Flores. Exigimos al gobierno del presidente Donald Trump prueba de vida inmediata de la vida del presidente Maduro y de la primera dama. El presidente Maduro ya había sido muy claro y había advertido al pueblo venezolano de que una agresión de esta naturaleza, por la desesperación de la voracidad energética de los Estados Unidos, podía presentarse.
Y desde aquí, desde este hermoso lugar, llamo a la calma a nuestro pueblo. Confíen en el liderazgo, confíen en la dirigencia del alto mando político, militar, para la situación que estamos atravesando. Mucha calma, que nadie caiga en el desespero, que nadie caiga en facilitarle las cosas al enemigo invasor, al enemigo terrorista que nos atacó cobardemente. Que nadie le facilite las cosas. No es la primera lucha, no es la primera batalla que contra este pueblo han emprendido algunos, creyendo que nos van a derrotar, creyendo que van a mancillar el honor y la dignidad del soldado, del policía, del venezolano de a pie.
We're joined by a journalist on ground from Venezuela, Andrina Fermin. She joins us from the capital city, Caracas. We're also joined by Arvind Gupta, who's a director of Vivekananda International Foundation. He's also been the former deputy NSA. And we also have Michael Patrick Mulroy, who's a former deputy assistant secretary of defense, USA. Thank you all of you for being part of this broadcast. Andrina, to you first, what is the situation on ground, and what really happened today? Can you tell us a little bit about the explosions that many of you would have heard today? Is the country in a state of panic? Is the country angry? What's happening there?
Well, yeah, Venezuelans were scared due to the blast that wake everyone late at night today. And now it's a tense calm in the city because the national forces are asking the Venezuelan people to remain calm and to remain in their houses. Actually, they had closed gas stations in Venezuela in order to avoid people to go out. And the people are now gathering around supermarkets and pharmacies to buy supplies and everything else. But the rest of the people are inside the houses, avoiding any cause confrontation or anything that could happen inside the country after the situation that happened in the midnight. We face a scenario now that we don't have a president in the country, that the vice president of the country should assume the power of the country in the next 48 hours. And after that, she will call an election in the next 3 days, according to the national constitution. Right. That is the scenario we will face in the next hours.
Right. Thank you, Andrina. Do stay with us. Mr. Gupta, Donald Trump, President Trump, had launched several strikes on boats from Venezuela a few days ago. In fact, during Christmas, he did confirm that there was a land strike. There was a dock site that was attacked. And he has been claiming that Nicolas Maduro has been running this international drug organization and that he needs to go. There have also been concerns on democratic backsliding in the country. But a lot of people are also looking at this as an overreach, as an imperial overreach. Venezuela itself is saying that this is because US is driven by greed for natural resources. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, if you look at the national security strategy, which the US administration brought out recently, a few weeks ago, it talked about the Trump corollary to Monroe Doctrine, and also the primacy of Western Hemisphere in the US foreign policy priorities. And that seemed to confirm that the US would be taking Western Hemisphere now very seriously. And the attacks on the boats, etc., the criminal gangs and narco-terrorist groups, etc., have been happening earlier also. And this is a build-up. The build-up to this development was taking place.
Yeah.
But even so, taking out the president and his wife is perhaps a new development.
Yeah.
And regime changes have happened earlier, and there have been several instances of that. But this is certainly something which has surprised the world. And we will have to see what are the implications for the new global order or disorder that I think is now arising. The international norms on which the global order has been based, they are all under great stress and strain now. And I think it's pretty much everyone on his own.
Right, that's very important. Michael Patrick Milroy, taking off from what Mr. Gupta said, how do you look at the extraction that happened of the president and his wife from Venezuela to US soil, and the fact that both of them are being indicted now by a US court on charges of narco-terrorism? Something like this probably happened many years ago, and this is probably the direct intervention of United States of America and Latin America after a long, long time. Do you see this as a well thought out strategy, and what is the larger message that America is trying to send out to the world, especially to China and to Russia?
So good to be with you. I think there will be legal challenges to what the current administration is doing, both internally and U.S. law. They didn't get authority from Congress, for example, and under international law. But I think what the White House is going to say is, just as you just mentioned, Maduro has been actually indicted since 2020. And similar to the operation back in the 1990s, the U.S. did to apprehend Manuel Noriega and put him on trial, eventually convicted and incarcerated. They will say that is the legal basis for how this was conducted. As far as the campaign, it has been, aside from the legalities of it, it has been performed from the military perspective and the intelligence perspective pretty well. I mean, they started targeting these drug boats. They then started seizing these oil tankers. Again, a lot of legal questions there, but trying to choke off the regime. And then, per the president, there's a CIA covert action operation that was likely not only trying to build up the opposition, but identify and locate Maduro himself, which probably led to this successful operation. Right. And now the question I think everybody's going to be asking is what comes next?
Yes.
Because just because you remove the top, Maduro, doesn't mean his regime is gone.
Right.
So that could be that this is just going to continue with the boat strikes and the tanker seizures and potentially even more direct action against the remaining parts of the regime. Should it be vice president, obviously he's taken over, but the Minister of Defense and Interior. So that's the question I think everybody.
Let me ask that question to Aditya Rajkal, my colleague. Aditya, what is expected next? Because I was just remembering the statement by President Trump on Nicolas Maduro, where he said that, he is emptying prisons and asylums and forcing people to leave leave Venezuela and enter America. So there's this question of refugees, there's a question of stability, peace, and the larger message that America wants to send out to the world. What are the big takeaways from the strikes that have happened? And of course, what is expected next?
Well, what we have seen over the last 15 years, Vasudha, is unprecedented. I mean, we've seen the US operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan, extractions that have taken place in the last 2 decades or more. But a sitting president being extracted in such a fashion is certainly unprecedented. But I agree with Arvind Gupta and other panelists that, there were significant warnings in the past. There was a buildup that was happening for time and again. There were warnings from Trump administration that we are locked and loaded. We are very much ready. And there were opportunities that were given to Maduro. Of course, Maduro on his part had said and suspected that there's a regime change operation. Now, there are details that are coming out of a CIA source within the Venezuelan government who was giving live details of Maduro's inside his palace, and of course what the meetings that he was indulging in, etc., that helped the US Delta Force to lead this operation. Now the big question is what next. One, the US President Donald Trump has just given an interview to Fox News where he has said that if the Maduro loyalists continue to protest and engage in violence against the opposition and against what has just happened, then a second strike would be imminent. Now, as of now, the US does not plan to create more violence or strikes, but if at all there is major violence, etc., then US will be forced to intervene. Donald Trump also saying that he was witnessing everything live, and this was almost like a television show. He also said that no soldiers were harmed in this entire process, but there was a US Delta Force helicopter that was targeted, but they managed to get it back on US soil. So both Maduro and his wife are now on a warship right now. That's what we are learning. They are on a US warship and now will be facing the consequences of the law. But of course, there will be legal hurdles in the United States. Now, the Congress has been briefed about what has happened, but there will be legal challenges. Many are now saying that what has happened in Venezuela, could that be translated and perhaps taken to Iran as well, where again, significant anti-regime protests are underway. So, of course, there are larger geopolitical consequences that will happen. It's unprecedented, really, and perhaps we haven't seen the end of it yet.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aditya. And I request all the guests to stay with us. My colleague Disha Bakchi also has more details on what are the big takeaways from the strikes that have happened and what can be expected next.
Right, Vasudha. So, of course, let's first take a look at what will happen next in terms of the future of Venezuela. But some of the latest details that we are learning is that US President Trump is going on US media, and now he's been speaking to Fox, where he's been saying that the US will now decide the future of Venezuela, and that the US can't just let anyone come in and just somebody else take over Venezuela. But apart from that, some of the details that I'd like to talk about is, firstly, it's unclear who's really going to lead the country now with Maduro out of the country, whether the vice president will take over or not. However, the government has urged that the people must remain calm because they are in a sense concerned that there could be anti-Maduro protests taking over the country, really celebrating these US strikes, which could lead to unrest in Venezuela. But apart from that, the Venezuelan defense minister has said that all the armed forces have been deployed on the borders as well as within the city to ensure that law and order remains. As I mentioned, the Trump plan on Venezuela is still unclear as to what he's going to do next. Could there be a second wave of strikes even targeting other parts of the country? That is unclear. However, as I mentioned, US President has been speaking on various US media channels where he has now stating really that the US will decide the future and destiny of Venezuela, which government will take over, whether the opposition will, the party will take over. That remains to be seen. So a lot of uncertainty when it comes to Venezuela. Because remember that the US has clearly declared that the Maduro government is illegitimate, meaning that even the vice president taking over would mean that US still sees that government as illegitimate. And now the big question really remains is, as I was mentioning, could there be a regime change in Venezuela because of this action? Could we see even the Nobel Peace Prize winning winner Machado coming back to Venezuela to take power? So a lot of big questions really remaining about Venezuela's future. One thing we do know clearly is that Venezuelan President Maduro is going to stand trial on criminal charges in the US. He's been indicted in a New York court. I'm just going to quickly take you through what are the charges that Maduro, as well as his wife actually, First Lady of Venezuela, are now facing. And one of the last points in what's next is that Spain while they have said that they're observing what's happening, the developments, they've said that we're offering to mediate the tensions between US and Venezuela and to ensure that there's a peaceful transition in Venezuela. So let's quickly take a look at some of the charges that Venezuelan President Maduro and his wife are facing. The big charges, one of the biggest charges, of course, narco-terrorism, the narco-terrorism conspiracy. US President has repeatedly said that Maduro and his government have been supporting drug trafficking within the country, and that's one of the biggest charges that he's facing. The cocaine importation conspiracy, again, drug trafficking charges that Maduro is facing. Some of the other charges that he's also facing is possession of weapons, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, a direct threat to US national security, which is again one of the big reasons that why the US chose to take this step. In fact, there was a US arrest warrant, which is what the Trump administration is using to legitimize its actions against Venezuela. And the last point, of course, conspiracy to possess weapons against the US. Again, a national security threat, which Trump is now using to justify this action. Whether the international platforms and the US Congress, in fact, will believe this justification, take this justification, yet to be seen. But this is what the Trump administration is using to justify its actions in Venezuela.
Right. Thank you, Disha, for joining us with those details. We're also joined by Einat Tanjin, who's a Global and China Strategist, Senior Fellow, Center for International Government Innovation. Thank you, Professor Tanjin, for joining us on this broadcast. What is the larger message that America is trying to send out to the world, especially to countries like China and Iran?
Well, if you look at this in terms of the security, the national defense policy was put out, you see that Trump is acting on this notion that there are no more laws, that the U.S. is entitled to take over other countries simply by saying that they're somehow drug dealers or whatever. So the post-World War II era is officially ended. The U.S. has become what it used to term a rogue state. It is engaged in piracy. It is now engaged in direct regime change, illegally occupying other countries and in essence, kidnapping their leaders. The question is, how will the rest of the world react to this?
Right. And how do you look at the indictment of Venezuelan president on charges of narco-terrorism on foreign soil? Would you see that as violation of Venezuela's sovereignty?
Of course it is. I mean, what if the United States decided that they view the Indian government as trading with Russia in terms of oil and decided that they wanted to kidnap Modi and bring him to the United States for their own brand of justice? This is nothing more than lynching. The real question is, why is he doing it at this time? Given the Epstein files and the sorry state of the American economics, despite the quote GDP growth, the fact is most Americans are on very difficult times, and I think this is we have to look at this cynically. And Donald Trump is trying to change the narrative away from something that could damage his presidency and even result in an impeachment, one that would go to the Senate and might have some chance of being acted on.
Right. Professor Tanjin, in 2025, the year was a lot about sanctions, tariffs, and Donald Trump trying to stop wars. How is the international community going to look at these strikes that U.S. has initiated against Venezuela?
Well, I mean, on one side, you see a lot of countries that have tried to appease Donald Trump. They think, well, he's only going to be here for 3 years. We can last through this, particularly true of Europe. Europe is in a quandary now. They objected to what they saw as unilateral action by Russia in Ukraine. Now they're faced with a situation that's even more direct with Venezuela. The question is, what are they going to say? Many countries just say, well, we'll do what we have to survive, and we'll ignore any kind of principles. But it's getting harder and harder. The question is this the straw that breaks the camel's back of people's, of countries' willingness to go along with Donald Trump, or will they see this for what it is, which is a direct threat to the international order? The idea that if you're powerful, you can simply use your power to do whatever you want in your own economic best interest. I don't think anybody is under any other assumption that the reason he's going in there, other than to change the narrative, is to grab the Venezuelan oil. It's one of the richest reserves in the world. The U.S. has the kind of processing that's necessary to take care of this kind of heavy crude that comes out of Venezuela. Given what's happening with Canada and other places, there are questions about what would happen to those plants, those crackers, the oil processing facilities. So at this point, we have to wait to see how the world is going to react to this, whether they at some point they will just say, look, enough is enough. You have to stop doing this.